Imagine a world plunged into turmoil, where the answers people once trusted seem insufficient and certainty seems lost. In this world, Jesus appears as a beacon, carrying a wisdom that doesn't just fit into the human understanding. It transcends it. He gathers followers from all walks of life: fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary men and women, each bringing their own burdens, questions, and fears. One day, as he walks through a village, people gather around him, eager for guidance. Among them is a young man, torn by indecision. He steps forward, his voice trembling as he speaks to Jesus. "Teacher, I am lost. I've tried to plan, I've sought counsel, but I still don't know which path to take. It feels like the world is crumbling around me." Jesus looks at him with a warmth that seems to dissolve the young man's fear, and he answers, "If you only knew how deeply you are cared for by God. Even in uncertainty, he holds you close." And then, gently, Jesus tells a story that resonates with everyone listening. There were once two builders. One chose to build his house on solid rock, high up where storms might come but would never break it. The other, confident in his plans and impatient for comfort, built his house on sand, closer to the shore. He finished quickly and enjoyed the view. But when the storm arrived, as storms always do, the rain battered both houses. The house on the sand couldn't withstand the flood, and it was washed away. But the house on the rock stood firm, unmoved by the storm. The young man's eyes widen as he listens, realizing that Jesus is urging him to seek a foundation beyond mere human wisdom. Jesus continues, "Life will always have storms. In uncertainty, look not just to your plans or your wisdom, but anchor yourself in God's wisdom. His ways will hold you steady when all else falters." Those listening are captivated, for Jesus speaks with authority. Yet it's an authority that comes from a place of deep love and understanding. They feel that this wisdom doesn't dismiss their struggles, but instead gives them a way to face them with peace. Jesus' words aren't just advice. They feel like a gift, an invitation to trust in something greater than themselves. As he finishes, a sense of calm settles over the crowd. Many feel that, for the first time, they can face the unknown, not with fear, but with faith. And as Jesus moves on, they realize that the wisdom he shares is more than words. It's a living, breathing truth that, when embraced, becomes the solid rock on which their hearts can rest, even in the fiercest storms. As Jesus walked on, a quiet ripple of wonder spread through the crowd, and one of his disciples approached him, marveling at the impact of his words. "Master," he said, "they listen to you as they've never listened to anyone else. How is it that you hold such authority yet remain so humble?" Jesus looked at him with a gentle smile. "True greatness isn't found in seeking power over others. The kingdom of heaven is different from the kingdoms of this world. Whoever wants to be the greatest among you must be a servant of all." The disciple furrowed his brow, clearly wrestling with this idea. In the world he knew, power came through status, control, and influence. But Jesus, the man they followed and revered, chose paths that baffled them. He often ate with tax collectors, healed the unclean, and spent time with those others despised. Then, as if sensing the disciples' thoughts, Jesus turned and spoke. "Consider the mustard seed," he began, gesturing to a small patch of ground beside them. "It's one of the tiniest seeds you can plant, nearly invisible in the soil. Yet, when it grows, it becomes a great tree, giving shelter and shade to all who come near." Jesus' gaze grew intense, and he looked at his disciple with a wisdom that felt both comforting and challenging. In the same way, he continued, "Humility is like that mustard seed. It may seem small, even unnoticed, but it holds the potential to grow into something that touches and uplifts everyone around it. To serve, to be humble, to lower yourself. This is true greatness in the eyes of God." The disciple felt his heart swell with understanding. He remembered moments when Jesus had bent down to heal the leper, when he had welcomed children who others tried to push away, and when he had knelt to wash the feet of each disciple, a gesture that had both shocked and moved them. Each of these acts had been small, humble, yet more powerful than any display of authority he had ever seen. As they continued walking, Another disciple leaned in, catching the conversation. "But Master, why does the world find humility so difficult? Why do we resist lowering ourselves?" Jesus paused, looking at both of them. "Pride builds walls, seeking to lift us above others. But humility opens doors. It allows us to see others as they are, to feel their struggles, and to care for them as God does. Remember this: to lead, you must be willing to serve. In serving, you become great, because you reflect the heart of God." The disciples felt a deep conviction, yet also a deep peace. For the first time, they began to see humility not as weakness but as a source of power, an invisible strength that connected them not only to God but to one another. The crowd continued to follow, and among them, some had overheard Jesus' words, and though they might not fully understand, a seed had been planted. And Jesus walked on, humble yet mighty, offering glimpses of a kingdom that defied all earthly expectations. As they walked further, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the path. Jesus and his disciples were now approaching a village where the people eagerly awaited his teaching. As they neared, a man rushed out from the crowd, desperation clear in his eyes. He knelt before Jesus and, in a trembling voice, spoke, "Teacher, I have been deceived many times. I followed those who promised me riches, others who offered me peace, but I am left empty and broken." Jesus reached down, helping the man to his feet, and looked at him with a compassion that seemed to peer straight into his soul. "Not all who speak of light bring truth," Jesus said. "To know the difference, you must seek the wisdom of God, not just the promises of men." The man's eyes, weary from years of disappointment, filled with new hope. "But how, Master?" he asked. "How can I tell the difference when they all sound so convincing?" Jesus turned to his disciples and the crowd, sensing the importance of this moment. "Imagine a flock of sheep grazing in the field," he began. "One day, a stranger appears, dressed like a shepherd, and calls out to them. Though he wears the clothes, he does not carry the heart of a shepherd. The sheep sense it and hesitate. They know the true voice of their shepherd, for they've spent time with him, learned his ways, and trust his call. They are not led astray." The man and those listening began to understand. Jesus continued, "To know what is true, stay close to God. Spend time in prayer, seek his words, and hold his wisdom close. When you know the heart of the Father, no matter how many strangers call to you, you will recognize his voice above them all." The crowd murmured softly, absorbing his words. It was as if he had lifted a veil, showing them a path through the confusion of life's many voices. Jesus looked at the man, whose face had transformed from despair to calm understanding. "Seek God's guidance and allow his Spirit to be your discernment," Jesus said. "Truth shines brightly to those who seek it in God." One of the disciples, watching the exchange, thought back to the temptations and distractions he had faced. He understood now that the closer he remained to Jesus, the clearer his path became, free from the confusion of hollow promises. As they moved into the village, a profound silence filled the crowd. Each person carried with them a newfound resolve to seek wisdom, to recognize the voice of truth amidst the world's noise. And Jesus, as always, walked among them, his presence a light in the gathering twilight. Just as the village gathered closer around Jesus, a man spoke up from the edge of the crowd, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. "Master," he called, "I've tried to live rightly, to follow the ways of wisdom and faith, but sometimes the burden is too heavy. Logic tells me it's impossible. How can I carry on when all reason points to defeat?" Jesus met his gaze with eyes that radiated both understanding and strength. "When logic fails, faith remains," he replied. "There will always be moments when the path seems too steep, when solutions seem beyond reach, and fear takes hold. But it is precisely in those moments that faith reveals its power." The crowd hung on his every word, sensing that this was more than just teaching. It was an invitation to trust beyond what they could see or understand. Jesus gestured to a nearby mountain, its peak lost in the evening mist. "Imagine," he began, "a person standing at the base, looking up, overwhelmed by its height. convinced it cannot be scaled. But step by step, without seeing the peak, they move forward in faith. In time, they find themselves standing at the summit, not by their own strength, but because they believed they could make it. The people murmured softly, some nodding as if his words touched on struggles they knew well. Jesus continued, "In life, you will face mountains of doubt, valleys of despair. Human logic may not find a way through, but faith in God can. When you trust Him, you move forward not by sight but by certainty in His guidance." One of his disciples, who had once felt himself trapped by his own doubts, listened with a growing sense of conviction. He remembered the many times Jesus had led them through storms, challenges, and dangers, each time defying what reason might have warned. He knew now that faith wasn't blind, it was grounded in a relationship with the one who sees beyond every limit. Jesus turned back to the man who had spoken, a gentle smile on his face. "Have faith," he said softly. "Even if you don't see the end, trust that God does. He knows every step, every stone on the path, and He will carry you when your own strength runs out." A profound stillness fell over the crowd. They realized that Jesus wasn't merely asking them to defy logic. He was inviting them to live with a courage that transcended their understanding. And as He moved among them, His presence seemed to kindle a fire within each heart, a faith that would carry them beyond any mountain of doubt, rooted in the unwavering love and wisdom of God. The night had fully set in, and the stars began to shimmer against the vast dark sky. The crowd settled, huddling closer as if reluctant to let this moment slip away. A young woman in the group, her face drawn with weariness, looked up at Jesus and hesitated before speaking. "Teacher," she murmured, "there are so many voices, so much noise around me. Sometimes, I don't know how to find peace, how to listen to what truly matters." Jesus nodded, his expression softening with understanding. He looked at her and, in a quiet voice that seemed to resonate deeply, said, "Silence has a wisdom all its own. When the world grows loud and chaotic, remember. Sometimes, you find the voice of God not in thunder, but in a whisper." The people fell utterly silent, holding their breath as if waiting to hear that very whisper right there with Him. Jesus continued, "There was once a prophet who sought God on a mountain, expecting Him to appear in fire, in wind, or in a great earthquake. But God was not there. Then came a gentle whisper, so soft it was barely audible. And that was where the prophet found Him. In the quiet, the young woman's face softened, and those listening seemed to feel a shift in their own hearts. Jesus went on, "Silence allows us to step back, to slow down, to listen with a heart unburdened by haste. In the stillness, we find clarity, for it's there that God speaks to us without distraction." One of the disciples, recalling the times he had seen Jesus retreat alone into the hills, nodded with newfound understanding. He realized now that those moments of quiet weren't just times of rest. They were times when Jesus sought wisdom, drawing strength from a silence that others often overlooked. Jesus turned to the crowd, his voice low but carrying a powerful sense of calm. "There is wisdom in waiting before you speak, in allowing the heart to hear God's guidance before responding. In times of chaos, seek silence, for there you will find peace and strength that go beyond what words can offer." The young woman closed her eyes, breathing in this truth as if it were a balm for her weary soul. And around her, others seemed to do the same, as if savoring the silence Jesus had taught them to cherish. It was a silence not of emptiness, but of fullness, an invitation to connect with God in the stillness of the heart. In the quiet of that night, under the starlit sky, they found a deeper sense of peace. And as Jesus moved among them, His presence was like the whisper of God itself, guiding them gently toward a wisdom that came not from noise or haste, but from the gentle, profound silence of faith. The quiet lingered like a gentle embrace over the crowd, each person feeling more connected to the wisdom that seemed to flow from Jesus' very presence. Yet, amid the calm, a man stepped forward, his face marked with the scars of hardship. "Teacher," he began, his voice edged with both reverence and a touch of pain, "I have faced trial after trial. I try to keep faith, but the weight of these struggles nearly crushes me. Why must we suffer so much?" Jesus looked at him, compassion filling his gaze. "The trials you endure are not meant to break you," he replied, his voice steady yet gentle. "They are meant to strengthen you, to draw you closer to God. Remember, as gold is refined in fire, so are hearts refined through trials." The man's eyes softened, yet confusion lingered. Seeing this, Jesus continued, speaking not only to him but to everyone gathered. "When you face persecution or hardship, do not see it as punishment. Instead, see it as a chance to grow in strength and in grace. Every trial brings an opportunity to trust in God's faithfulness. In every storm, God is there, guiding you, making you stronger." A murmur of understanding rippled through the crowd, and Jesus went on, his words now a balm to their wounds. "Even I face rejection and suffering. Yet, these trials do not push me away from the Father, they draw me closer. And when you respond to trials with grace, you reveal the heart of God to the world. For in your suffering, His love and strength shine brightest." One of the disciples, recalling moments of fear and doubt, nodded. He had witnessed Jesus facing hostility, ridicule, and even danger, yet never with anger, only with an unwavering grace. He realized that these moments had only deepened Jesus' bond with the Father, a closeness born of trust beyond understanding. Jesus then looked into the eyes of each person there, his words like a promise. "Your trials are not the end of you. They are the beginning of something greater. Through them, you gain resilience, you gain compassion. And as you endure, know that God is not distant. He walks with you, even in your darkest moments." The man who had spoken felt a burden lift from his heart, as if the trials he had faced had found a new purpose. Around him, others seemed to feel the same, their pain somehow transformed into a quiet strength. They understood now that their struggles, while hard, could also be holy, a path that brought them closer to God. And as Jesus continued to walk among them, they found themselves renewed, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Not with fear, but with a new resilience, knowing they were not alone in their trials. The crowd moved with a softer step now, each person carrying a newfound resilience in their hearts. Among them, a woman stepped forward, her face shadowed by past wounds. Her voice was low but carried a deep sorrow. "Teacher," she asked, "how can we forgive those who have caused us so much pain? I know we're told to forgive, but the hurt runs so deep. How can we let go?" Jesus turned to her, his expression filled with empathy. "Forgiveness is not easy," he replied gently, "but it is the path to true freedom. When you forgive, you release yourself from the chains of anger and resentment that weigh down your soul." The woman's eyes glistened, a glimmer of hope flickering within her sorrow. Jesus continued, his voice a soothing balm to the pain that lingered in the hearts of many there. "You see, forgiveness is not about excusing wrongs or pretending they didn't happen. It's about choosing love over bitterness, choosing to trust in God's justice rather than carrying the burden of judgment yourself. When you forgive, you reflect the heart of God, who has forgiven you much." A young man in the crowd, haunted by a family conflict, shifted uneasily, listening closely. Jesus saw this and looked at him with a knowing smile. "Consider this," he said, "if you forgive someone 70 times 7 times, does it not make you stronger? Each act of forgiveness renews your soul. Each moment of grace opens your heart. Forgiveness may feel like a sacrifice, but it brings healing, not just to them, but to you." The woman and the young man exchanged a glance, both feeling the weight of his words settling deeply. Jesus continued, "Just as the Father forgives you, so too are you called to forgive one another. It is through love that we overcome pain, and it is through forgiveness that our souls find peace." A sense of peace seemed to fill the crowd, as though a collective burden had been lifted. They understood now that forgiveness wasn't a mere obligation. It was a gift, an act that allowed them to rise above their pain, to let go of the bitterness that had held them captive for too long. The woman placed her hand over her heart, a soft smile forming on her face. She whispered, almost to herself, "I am free," and in that moment, many others felt the same. a release, a freedom from the chains of hurt, as if forgiveness had woven a thread of healing through each soul present. And as Jesus continued on his way, those who had gathered began to walk with lighter steps, a profound peace washing over them, for they had learned the path of love and forgiveness, the path that would lead them ever closer to the heart of God. As the crowd walked on, their hearts unburdened by the healing power of forgiveness, Jesus paused near a large stone, gesturing to the ground beneath them. He knelt and pressed his hand against the earth, as if drawing their attention to its steady strength. Looking up, he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Imagine a man building his house," he said, choosing to place it upon solid rock. When the storms come and the winds rage, his home stands firm, unmoved by the forces that try to tear it down. But another man, impatient, builds on shifting sand, eager for comfort without the cost. When the storm reaches him, his house cannot stand, for it has no foundation. The crowd listened intently, the image vivid in their minds. Jesus looked up, meeting their eyes, his expression serious yet kind. "In the same way, each of you must build your life on a strong foundation. When you anchor yourself in God, His truth, His love, His wisdom, you build upon rock. But if you rely on things that are shallow or temporary, your foundation is like sand, and it will not endure." One of the disciples, recalling the many times he had felt shaken in moments of doubt, spoke up, "Master, how do we know if our foundation is strong? How do we build upon this rock you speak of?" Jesus looked at him with a gentle smile. "You build upon rock by living in the truth of my words. Hold fast to God's teachings, and let them be the compass of your heart. When challenges arise, as they surely will, do not be swayed by fear or by the easy path. Instead, hold to what is eternal, to what cannot be broken." The people exchanged glances, nodding slowly as his words sank in. They began to see their own lives, their decisions and values, through this new lens. Around them, the night had grown quiet, with only the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of water flowing over stones. Then Jesus added, "To build on rock is to choose a life grounded in God's love, to let that love shape every part of who you are. It is not without effort, but when the storms come, you will stand firm. You will endure, and you will find peace." The young woman from before, who had struggled with forgiveness, placed her hand over her heart, understanding now that each choice to forgive, to love, to trust in God, was like a stone added to her foundation. And as the crowd felt the weight of Jesus' message settle within them, they knew they had been given something precious, a path forward, a way to withstand the trials of life with courage. They walked on with a sense of resolve, hearts anchored on the foundation that could never be moved. And in the presence of Jesus, they felt as if their lives, now grounded in His truth, could weather any storm. The crowd continued on, their hearts now firm, as if each step pressed deeper into the foundation Jesus had described. Yet as they moved, a man with weary eyes and a tired smile stepped forward. "Master," he said, "we have all faced struggles, but some burdens, they don't end. It feels as if they're endless trials that follow us. Why does God allow such hardships to persist?" Jesus paused, looking at the man with deep compassion. "There are times," he began, "when challenges are given not as a punishment, but as a way to shape and refine the soul. Some trials are like hidden teachers, guiding you toward growth that only hardship can bring. Though painful, they have a purpose, even if that purpose isn't clear at first." The crowd listened, drawn in by the promise that their struggles were not in vain. Jesus continued, "Imagine a gardener who tends to a vine. To yield the best fruit, he prunes it, removing what is weak or unhealthy. The vine might seem bare and broken afterward, but in time it grows back stronger, producing richer fruit than before. So, too, does God sometimes allow trials to shape and refine you, preparing you for greater things?" The man nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the hope kindled by Jesus' words. "But how do we find strength when these burdens feel too great?" Jesus looked at him, his voice calm yet filled with strength. "You are not alone in these burdens. Each trial draws you closer to God if you allow it. And in every moment of weakness, God's strength will meet you. Lean into that strength. Trust that even your heaviest burdens have a divine purpose. A woman nearby, who had endured many years of hardship, felt her heart lighten. She realized that the pain she had carried was not simply an endless burden, but a path to a deeper understanding, a way to grow closer to God's heart. Then Jesus said, "Look around you. See how each person here carries a different story, a unique struggle. In these shared burdens, there is a common purpose, to draw each of you toward love, to teach you compassion. The hardships you face are the seeds of resilience, of wisdom, of kindness. When you trust in God's purpose, you transform these struggles into something beautiful." The crowd felt a profound unity in this, as if their separate lives, each marked by difficulty, were woven together into a greater tapestry. They understood that their burdens, once seen as weights to bear alone, could be transformed into bridges of understanding and compassion. As they walked on, each one felt a shift in their perspective. The trials they faced had become more than just challenges. They were part of a journey towards strength, kindness, and a deeper connection with God. And with Jesus beside them, they felt ready to face whatever lay ahead, knowing that every burden carried a purpose beyond what they could see. As they moved through the quiet night, each heart now filled with a renewed strength, a sense of gratitude settled over the crowd. One of the disciples, feeling the power of these teachings resonate deeply within him, spoke softly, "Master, it seems that all of these lessons, every moment you've shared with us, are like steps towards something greater, leading us somewhere we cannot yet see." Jesus smiled, his eyes filled with a wisdom that reached far beyond that night. "You are right," he replied. "Every teaching, every trial, every act of faith is preparing you, guiding you closer to God. But there is more. Each of you is being shaped for a purpose, not only for this life, but for eternity." The disciples looked at him, and the crowd felt a quiet awe settle over them as Jesus continued. "The path of faith is not merely about living well here. It is about preparing your heart, your soul, for the kingdom of God. This life is like a doorway, a passage, and how you live now, how you grow, how you love, will carry forward beyond this world." A young man in the crowd, pondering his own struggles, asked, "But Master, how can we be ready for something so vast, something we cannot fully understand?" Jesus placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "By living each day as though you are already in the presence of God. Walk with humility, love deeply, forgive often, and seek the truth in all things. In doing so, you bring the kingdom of heaven into this world and prepare your soul to receive it in the next." The crowd felt a wave of purpose wash over them, realizing that their daily choices, even the smallest acts, held eternal significance. Jesus continued, "Every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness, and each step of faith builds a legacy that reaches beyond this life. You are not just building your own path. You are part of God's greater story, a story that spans eternity." One of the women who had struggled with forgiveness now understood that her journey, her trials, were not just personal. They were woven into a divine tapestry that connected each of them to a larger, eternal plan. Jesus then looked over them all, his voice carrying a note of encouragement and promise. "Live with an open heart. Seek wisdom, trust in God's purpose, and let each day be a step toward the kingdom. Know that nothing is wasted. Every moment is a brushstroke in the masterpiece of God's plan for you." In that moment, they felt a peace that surpassed all understanding, a profound sense that their lives were both precious and purposeful. And as they walked alongside Jesus, they felt as if they were already stepping into the eternal kingdom he had promised. With each step grounded in love, faith, and the everlasting wisdom he had shared, they continued on, their hearts aflame with a clarity that only grew stronger, knowing they were part of something far greater than they had ever imagined, ready to walk in faith toward a horizon they could not yet see but now believed in with all their souls.